Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today on finding your path to IT security maturity. My name is Gary Jacobs. I'm the marketing manager at MedTech Solutions, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our goal today is to share what we've learned about the cyber threat landscape through our own experiences, as well as from other experts in the field. We'll talk about the ever more important cyber insurance market and the role it plays in case you suffer a cyber incident. And most importantly, we'll walk through the actions that we recommend you take to minimize threats to your business. We want to help you make the best IT security decisions for your organization so that you can continue to deliver the best patient care. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. We plan to leave some time at the end of the presentation for a short Q&A with our presenter. As you're listening to the presentation, please type any questions you might have into the chat window on your screen where you see the phrase "type message here." We have a large group in attendance and we'll be able to address some of your questions live today as time permits. Today's presentation will be recorded, so we'll be able to follow up with you after the webinar to address your specific questions, and everyone will receive a link to the recording of today's presentation. Finally, as a courtesy, please be sure to keep your audio controls muted throughout the presentation to avoid unnecessary background noise. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Kevin Tobey, MedTech Solutions Technical Sales Engineer, who will be your guide along the path to IT security maturity. Kevin?
Thank you, Gary. Welcome, everybody. Like any journey, we want to make sure that we understand the landscape before we set out. So today I'm going to cover what's happening, what we're seeing actually in the healthcare security landscape. This is a challenging time for healthcare, especially in regards to cybersecurity. We've seen a lot of changes come in very rapidly, and in the healthcare industry is particularly a valuable target to cyber criminals. In fact, according to the Herkovec Group, healthcare is the most breached industry in 2021. And what's worse is that in 70% of the cases, the delays caused by ransomware impacted patient care. And there's this idea that breaches only happen to large practices, and it's just not true. Everyone's a target. You know, they're equal opportunity criminals. They don't care about size of environment. They're just looking for gaps in security to take advantage of. And sometimes the smaller organizations can be an easier target because they don't have the budget or the expertise that they need to invest in security. As healthcare, in the healthcare industry, we store a lot of personal health information as well as personal identifiable information, and both get top dollar in the black market. And you know, these are big dollars, and the impact on patient care and your ability to operate and your reputation is on the line when you have a security incident. Phishing continues to be the easiest and most common vector for a breach. And in almost 90% of the breaches, the initial point of compromise was a phishing email. You know, those emails that come in and you click on them absent-mindedly, and next thing you know, your computer doesn't work anymore. The criminal's goal was to steal data and gain access to your environment so that they can install malware that allows them to access your environment. Let's take a look at the cyber incident rates. When we look at the current pace, we see that it's growing at an alarming rate. Notice a tremendous growth of ransomware in the top line of the chart. Ransomware is malicious software designed to block access or encrypt data until a sum of money is paid. Often data is exfiltrated or taken off your system and copied to a criminal system, and a ransomware demand is made, normally in a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Here we see that the ransomware incidents have increased 370% over the last 3 years. That's a huge increase. And in Q3 2021, we saw the data exfiltration rate occurred in 83% of cases. It's not just the ransomware. So let's talk about the impact of ransomware for healthcare organizations. Criminals want to hold your data hostage, and the more data they have access to, the greater their demands. Ransomware is designed to spread across the network and target database and file servers. That's where the biggest cache of data is. They want to paralyze your organization until their demands are met, and they promise to return the data, but remember, these are criminals. And if you don't pay, they threaten to release the data to the public or deliver more malware. We're seeing that in more than half the cases that if you pay the first ransom demand, that attackers will extort a second ransomware demand after receiving that initial payment. Stats from 2021 show that a business fell victim to ransomware every 11 seconds. That's incredible. According to the insurance industry, 8-figure losses are commonplace for ransomware incidents, with the average ransomware payment increasing from less than $10,000 at the end of 2018 to more than $220,000 in 2021. And that's just the ransomware. That doesn't include the other impacts on your business, including an average of 23 days downtime where you're not generating income, seeing patients, which represents the largest component of the losses. Another troubling point around ransomware is that generally at least 3 days pass between the first evidence of malicious activity, like that phishing email, and the ransomware demand. That's a lot of time to be roaming free in your system. And in more than 75% of the cases, ransomware was deployed outside of working area. That makes it even more difficult to protect. If you don't have a 24/7 team that's watching for it, time is your enemy. You need to respond as quickly as possible, have knowledgeable teams, and so that they can be effective in their real-time response. But before we go much further, I'd like to get a better sense of what your specific concerns are. We have a quick poll here, and this will help me address the concerns as we go through the presentation. So our questions are your employees likely to fall victim to phishing emails? Are your on-premise devices not adequately protected? Are there personal mobile devices with access to internal systems? And are you unsure of your cloud provider security capabilities? Which keeps you up at night? All right, we'll move on here. Right. Are you going to show the results, Gary?
Looks like we will follow up with results at a later date. Let's move along.
All right. If you suffer a security breach, one of the most important security resources is your insurer, believe it or not. And the cyber insurance industry is changing very quickly to keep up with what's going on. If you recently tried to purchase or renew your cyber insurance policy, you may notice that the landscape's a little different and that there's changes have taken place. Let's talk about what's happening there. Cyber insurance started about 20 years and was intended to protect companies, from third-party lawsuits and data losses, a hard drive fails, something like that. As time went on, policies and coverages have evolved. And in today's marketplace, we're seeing significant increases in premium. We're seeing reduction in coverages, and it's getting tougher to get cyber insurance because of the ransomware. So let's take a look at some statistics. This is the year-over-year rate change in the marketplace for standalone cyber insurance policies. You can see that from beginning in 2021 all the way up to the last data point, September, we're seeing significant premium increase, and it's getting worse every day. At this point, the average premium increase is 100 to 133% higher than it was just a year ago. That could be a significant hit to any organization trying to get cyber insurance. Why are we seeing these increases? Well, these criminals are very good at what they do, and it's tough to keep up with them. Security is now an arms race with those who spend the most, the winners. It's tough for actuaries to understand this, especially as fast as the change is coming, and this is causing higher losses for the insurance companies, and they don't like losses. This graph shows the cyber insurance loss ratios. You can see that in 2020, $1.7 billion in premiums were written in cyber insurance. Out of this, 1.2 billion was paid out. The loss ratio, that makes the loss ratio paid out at 73%. If you look at the previous 3 years, the ratio was 35%, 34%, and 47%. That's a huge jump, and it's a significant hit to the insurance carriers. So they're reacting to continue to be profitable, and that's why you're seeing increased rates as well as a lower exposure. You're seeing co-insurance added to the policies, and underwriters are now taking a closer look at organizations and their risk. That's why the best line of defense are the security measures you have in place. Let's look at the claims and what insurance companies are paying out. The top graph here are claims where Chubb Insurance Company was involved, and they are specific to healthcare industry and organizations from about $10 to $15 million in their practice. It's pretty interesting to see that 43% of the claims were paid out due to forensics. That's the diagnosing of how you were penetrated. Other costs include repairing your systems, restoring your systems, and restoring your data. You also see the higher claims for first-party costs. First-party costs are the loss of business income we talked about. It's 20 to 30 days. It's a 20 to 30 days you're out of business because you're trying to fix the problem or deal with ransomware. Let's also look at the chart beneath. And this is the graph of what a claim would look like when 37,000 records are breached. The biggest one is regulatory fines and PCI assessments. In 2020, over $500 million of regulatory fines were paid out in the healthcare industry, and that continues to grow. So it's very important to make sure that you know what your policy is going to cover. Now, I'm not an insurance expert, but I advise you to sit down with your insurance broker and make sure you know specifically what is covered in your policy, what is excluded, what are your deductibles, your retentions, co-insurance, and other limits. Some of the big differentiators in coverage include the incident response and forensics costs. When something happens, getting the proper people to make sure they can restore your systems and understand how you were penetrated or breached is the first priority. Of course, you need to consider the cost of fines and penalties, and there are also potential costs to replace systems and hardware. As I mentioned earlier, you may need to consider the impact on patients who incur injury or lack treatment during a cyber incident. That's going to be a tough one for you, the insurance companies, to fight over, whether it's going to be covered or not. But that's a discussion to have with your broker. There are other potential impacts for your leadership team to consider. The cost of ransomware itself, things like crisis communication costs, income loss, and cost of harm to your reputation. The last item on the list here is IT firm endorsement. When you're working with an IT provider like a managed service provider or a cloud hosting provider, and there's a breach, you want to bring a team that knows your systems already, and they don't have to learn everything from the ground up in the middle of crisis. When there's a claim, you're going to be stuck with the insurance carrier's choice. I advise you to talk to your broker whether you can add your team that you're already working with. And it's a lot easier to make a much more efficient transition in an incident when you deal with somebody who knows your system. That just gives you a sense of how in-depth these policies are and how many different coverages are available. It all comes back to working with your broker, understanding your exposures and your vulnerabilities, as well as how much premium you can afford. Now let's talk about when it's time to buy or renew your policies. For those of you who've been through this process, you could have seen significant premium increases, coverages eliminated, or limits lowered. The best thing you can do is make sure your security is up to date. That's the first line of defense. Insurance is secondary. And that's how underwriters are looking at your organization when they're determining the premium and coverage. I'm going to talk about more of these in the next section, but some of the main topics to address to ensure you're in the best possible position are here. Your exposure in terms of the number of records is really the biggest thing. It's what the insurance companies are looking at most closely. Other important considerations include, do you perform vulnerability and/or penetration testing? Are you training your employees on security? How to recognize a phishing email? Good security hygiene. How and where are you backing up your data? Who's responsible for IT security? Do you have an incident response plan? Are you using endpoint detection and response software or the same old antivirus? Are you using multi-factor authentication? Do you have an effective password policy? And is your data properly encrypted? In terms of protection, the two most important are multi-factor authentication, or MFA, and endpoint detection and response technologies, or EDR. Also, backups are critical. Can't say enough about having solid backups. Your broker is likely to tell you that there are almost no companies that are willing to write or renew insurance if you don't have MFA. Now let's talk about how you can create a roadmap or a plan for your specific path to security maturity. Now, there's no such thing as 100% secure, and no one could afford it if it existed. But what we want to do is take measured, appropriate, cost-effective steps in the right order to match your situation and minimize your risk as much as possible. I'm going to walk through what that looks like, but there's really no one-size-fits-all. There are definitely proven elements you can walk through on your own, and we'll talk about those. If you don't know what you're trying to protect, it's tough to focus your efforts, your money, and your resources to where they will be best utilized. We need to understand what your risks are, assess the value of the assets to determine what threats are most likely. We just talked about how that's applied when the insurance industry puts values on these assets or records. Now, there's plenty of risk types, but today we're going to focus on technical risks. Technical risk underlines most risk types, and HIPAA requires you to address them as well. When we talk about adding safeguard and controls, such as policies, employee training, and technical partners, we are mitigating these technical risks. We need to assess what degree we have risk. This needs to be measured against a formal framework. The framework should help us gauge our level of risk and identify how mature the security program is and what needs more work. There are no miracle solutions, but most businesses have similar needs, and we can follow in their footsteps when adopting a framework used in your industry. Even the Department of Health and Human Services is incenting you to choose a framework to measure your security against and provide evidence of adherence. HR 7898 provides for a reduction in fines if you are actively using a security framework. That's the good news. Now, as we think about risk and security, many healthcare businesses use third-party service providers to host systems, provide IT support, and help secure their environments. This approach may transfer some of your risk to the provider and can also help ease your compliance process. Your provider should be an expert in the roles that they fill, including security. MedTech Solution has adopted the High Trust Common Security Framework. That's a mouthful. We call it CSF, which is the healthcare industry's most rigorous security framework. It consolidates more than 15 standards and regulations, including HIPAA, PCI, COBIT, NIST, ISO, FTC, state laws, as well as leading practice frameworks for security and compliance. High Trust requires that security and privacy controls must be in place and are measured both internally And uniquely, it's audited by third parties for certification. It's an extremely rigorous process. I encourage you to look at this from your IT provider, both for your security peace of mind, as well as making your annual compliance process much easier. Contracts should also require an independent review of the vendor's controls be conducted, ensuring that testing includes the systems used by your business. Now, it's important to recognize that this can be complex, and the service provider can be an enormous asset in helping you to uncover the risks you may not be aware of. A recent project we worked on was for a client who was using an hosted EHR, electronic health record system, and the business assumed the risk was addressed by the host entity protecting that EHR. But as we worked through their departments, we found over 100 additional applications hosted by other vendors, internally and within their environment, that we needed to track and assess. Any one of those, if breached, can create a huge problem for the business, even with the primary patient data located and protected in the hosted provider's care. So what are some of the basics to move us toward a mature security program? First, again, what are we trying to protect? What is the baseline for moving forward? HIPAA requires that we know where all patient data lives and how it's protected. But we also have other exposures outside of HHS regulations. There's financial data, employee data, and other corporate confidential data that the cyber criminals would love to lay their hands on and they find valuable. And that should be tracked and protected as well. Ultimately, you're looking to add protection to ensure that you'll be able to continue and conduct business. Like other controls, adding cyber insurance is one more way to help your business recover from an incident. It's all about managing risk. Today, we rely on technology for patient care, and we recognize that cybersecurity is now an element of that patient care. We're going to run through all the important points of vulnerability within your system, so let's look at it as a whole first. We need to understand vulnerabilities in each of these areas. With people, we need to make sure employees follow security processes and procedures and can recognize things like phishing emails. Endpoints, the servers and computers your employees use, these all need to be protected. Applications, all of them need to be protected and backed up. Data, we're going to talk about encryption and other elements of data protection, and of course, your network as a whole. Underlying all of these is we need to make a solid security strategy, and unfortunately, a worst case plan for incident response. We hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Now let's go through each of these in more detail. These are the steps you'll take to improve your security maturity posture. We start by making sure that all staff, including providers, are trained in security awareness. Employees are your biggest risk. They're busy, they're under stress, they're focused on patient care, and cyber criminals know this. Social engineering takes advantage of that, and it's just too easy for employees to make a mistake. That can be incredibly costly. Employee training as well as testing are critical. You need to be able to identify whether phishing, spam, or social engineering scams are affecting your staff, and are they competent to recognize these. A phishing simulation program, which sends emails to employees throughout the year that replicates the approaches that hackers take, is a great way to provide training and measure improvement. It helps them understand the risks and learn to identify hacking techniques so they're not fooled. Phishing simulation is one of the easiest and most effective and cost-effective measures you can take. It's a very strong first step to your path to security maturity. Now let's talk about endpoints, the servers and computers your employees use to do their job. In the past, we've deployed antivirus and anti-malware software, and we thought that's all we needed. Today, antivirus is proving to be ineffective. If you're still using traditional AV, there's a good chance it may catch up to 25% of the malware, but that's just not enough. The best investment is to get endpoint detection and response agents, or EDR. They have built-in antivirus as well as malware tools to stop and prevent malicious activities, services, and program execution within your environment. What really makes EDR effective is when it comes with 24/7 monitoring and support. So if you have an event or incident, there's somebody to quickly and accurately manage it. They can determine if it's a false positive or whether it's a breach. Nobody wants to be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning unless it's real. So we need to get rid of false positives, but we need to take a close look and know what's going on at all times in our network. As I mentioned earlier, there's something that your cyber insurance company is going to be looking for. One of the other tools that you should consider is to block access to known bad sites. Cyber criminals often use legitimate websites to inject malware and harvest user credentials. Website filtering solutions such as Cisco Umbrella know where these sites live and will prevent you and your users from accessing these sites and the malware that lives there. But even this isn't foolproof. So now let's take a look at your applications. Vulnerability scans are important as they actively search for vulnerabilities in applications and systems. You can't protect or fix what you don't know about. A vulnerability scan will look for known vulnerabilities on apps and devices and recommend actions to be taken to remedy any found vulnerabilities. Not only is this a HIPAA requirement, it's an essential way of identifying exposures so you can fix them. The principle of least privilege means that you restrict users to only the data and applications that they need to do their job. By restricting their access, you make it more difficult for a hacker to get a foothold in your systems. Your company should not allow anyone to install an application without proper vetting and authorization of that app. And I can't say enough about keeping your systems up to date with the most recent patches. But even with auto updates, this does not guarantee security updates for all applications and devices. Firewalls, access points, and even IoT devices need to be patched, as they're targets for hackers now as well. Let's talk about data. Encryption is one of the oldest controls and is a HIPAA requirement. And we need to know what data is important, what type of data it is, such as PHI, and where this data is located. All of that helps determine what to encrypt. Now, we recommend encryption on all servers at a minimum. And machines that leave your building, notebooks, phones, those especially need encryption. If they're lost, the encryption will keep you out of trouble with HIPAA. It's also vital to make sure there is an offline or air-gapped backup. Air-gapped backups are much more difficult for an attacker to access and render useless when you need them the most. Your backups are a target for hackers just for that reason. Now let's talk about your network overall. Once we understand the applications and how they're delivered to users, as well as where the data lives, we can now apply controls. Access controls are crucial at many levels, and most applications provide a way to address this. But with more remote workers, teleworkers, and contractors, their access needs to be monitored and controlled. Using tools like MFA, conditional access, and role-based authentication controls, these are the primary tools to control that access. Again, this is something you'll need to show you're addressing for cyber insurance. Also consider the need to manage data on a user's personal wireless device. Often users have access to sensitive data from their personal cell phone, email, files, things like that. These devices need to be managed and the data protected using mobile application management or mobile device management tools. And we also find that many businesses allow personal devices to be used on internal or production wireless networks. This means that any device that's not under the control of IT may be able to introduce malware. And did you know that there's more malware written for Android than Windows today? So phones should be absolutely excluded from accessing the internal or business network. Let them use the guest network. Segregation is also a useful tool for security networks. We have many legacy EHRs and applications out there that they still need to access in a read-only data mode, but we need to protect these as well. Segmenting or micro-segmenting a network to limit who can see legacy systems creates an island, if you will, for that workload to protect it and reduce exposure until it can be updated, replaced, or hopefully retired. Now you have an idea of how you can build your security maturity model, addressing critical points of vulnerability appropriately over time. But there's still a chance you'll experience a breach, and at that point, it's all about how you manage it. Let's talk through the critical line of defense and how all of your planning comes together to help you respond and recover in the case of a breach. I said earlier, there's no such thing as being 100% secure. So no matter how effective your controls are, there is still a risk. Everyone assumes their data is backed up and that they have a method to restore their data, but this is a big mistake. Many backup systems may be misconfigured, they haven't done a successful backup in a week or two, or they've already been compromised when needed. You also need to have a pristine copy of data off the production environment or air-gapped. An incident response plan, or IRP, is ultimately how you'll work through the issues and get your data restored. And this can take hundreds of hours, even with good backups. Your plan must be tested to ensure the process is adequate when you need it. Include in your IRP the contacts and information that they'll be required to bring your IT systems back in line. Include vendors, licenses, policies, your insurance carrier, and other critical information for recovery efforts. It's most important to know who's on the team and how to reach them. And if you have an incident, there's a good chance you'll not have access to your network. So have an alternate means to access your plan. Your cyber insurance company is there to help as well with recovery efforts. To deliver the highest level of protection to your technology environments and minimize the disruption to patient care, make the right investment for your organization, you have to have a plan. As I mentioned, your workflow is your first line of defense, and training is key to minimizing the risk of phishing and malware attacks. Create a security maturity roadmap. Know what your gaps are and create a plan to address them following the approach we've discussed. Your supply chain is a critical component of cybersecurity, and your IT services or cloud hosting providers are a critical part of your supply chain. Recognize that protecting your environment, patients, and PHI is a shared responsibility between you and your IT services providers. Choose a partner that is high trust, CSF certified, a partner that understands and is tested on this critical security, legal, and regulatory requirements that are specific to the healthcare industry, and who can help you with the annual vulnerability and penetration testing. And finally, be prepared and have a ready and an available incident response team that operates 24/7 and gives you a three-legged stool for incident response. That three-legged stool is made up of an always-on network operations center, or NOC, a security operations center, or SOC, and a computer security incident response team, or CSIRT. Remember that I mentioned more than 75% of the time, ransomware was deployed after working hours and especially during weekends. Your 24/7 team must be ready and prepared. These are your first responders, and the more knowledgeable they have, more knowledge they have about your network and your security, the more effective they're going to be when it comes time to respond. Now let's talk about the overarching incident response plan in a bit more detail. There are two very strong, sometimes opposing forces at play when these kinds of incidents occur. Naturally, the recovery of data is your primary concern, but the preservation of evidence and data you'll need to complete a forensic analysis is just as critical. And the more prepared you are for an incident, like an emergency, the better the expected result. Recovery in the case of ransomware has the opposing force of, do you pay the criminals, or is your security maturity at a level that you can recover your systems through other methods and get those systems operational again? Our goal is to provide you a roadmap that provides you the best chance of recovering your systems without paying the ransom or experiencing significant downtime. Equally important, however, is the preservation of technical data so that you can identify how the breach occurred so that the gaps in your security can be corrected. This is required so malware can be eradicated and the data needed by the legal teams, the regulators, HR teams, PR teams, insurers can all be preserved. The actions that the technical response team takes in the initial hours can dictate whether you're able to preserve the required data that you need or if it's lost. In order to deliver on your recovery and preservation requirements or goal, there are 6 critical aspects to an incident response plan. First, have an internal team that is responsible for these incidents. Make sure there's a leader and that you have covered the legal, technical, HR, and internal and external communication elements required for your business. Know these requirements in advance. Have the right external experts in place well in advance of a breach. I suggest the 3-legged stool we mentioned, the NOC, SOC, and CSIRT team, but also include your insurance or insurance broker and public relations team as well. You're going to need them. Not all breaches are created equal. Define what a small, medium, and a large breach look like within your organization and create a plan that is appropriate for each type of breach. Each breach type should have a corresponding set of actions and checklists. Make sure you know your legal and regulatory obligations and their respective deadlines. And update your plan regularly at an annual basis, but more frequently if there are key personnel or regulatory changes. And then finally, practice, at least annually. But the more frequent the practice, the better your planning and response will be. One of the most important external data security resources, if you find yourself in the midst of a breach, is your insurer or insurance broker. They are critical participants and part of that supply chain. Keep them in the loop. So let's conclude with what we've learned in this fight through our own experiences and the knowledge of other experts. What we know is that bad actors' ability to home in on cybersecurity gaps in both systems and people has proved to be unnervingly frequent and successful. They have very effective tools that allow them to launch widespread attacks and cripple businesses. And as we look back at the common causes of cyber incidents, we continue to emphasize that you must protect your endpoints. You must educate users and implement tools to protect all your endpoints. Have a plan on how you will implement MFA and EDR as quickly as possible. We've seen EDR foil a lot of security attacks. Know your supply chain and ensure whoever's supplying and managing your technology is qualified and certified to do the job you need to protect your business. Know your weak points and have a plan on how to strengthen your defenses. And have a plan in the case of an incident that is up to date, practiced, and can be executed quickly and accurately. I've also summarized a high-level incident response standard operating procedure for technology teams, and it's critical to isolate potentially compromised devices from the rest of your network as quickly as possible in order to limit the damage. It's equally important to ensure you have forensic information from that device so that you can determine the entry point in addition to the breadth of the attack so you can stop it. Stopping it on one device does not guarantee that there are not other devices compromised. And finally, thoroughly clean or rebuild the environment and add additional security if you didn't have them already. This approach has paid off in multiple experiences. Here at MTS, we've followed this model as we've described, with these strategies implemented across our entire business and as the foundation of every service we provide to every client. And we continue to research and develop best practices as the security landscape changes. You see EDR and MFA at the top of our list, along with secure email to protect common services that end users utilize. Have a backup of your critical data that's air-gapped offline. Implement tools that prevent the movement of data outside your network. Implement security tools at every layer of your network and invest in the support of those tools if you don't have that right level of knowledge internally. Make sure you're prepared to do forensic analysis and collect the right data to recognize and respond to an attack, and have a ready security response team. In summary, if your business is doing the basic things mentioned, you'll reduce your technical exposure and ultimately your risk. Your business will be better prepared to deal with problems when they arise, so you can minimize damage and more quickly recover from an incident. And all of this will improve your likelihood of qualifying for cyber liability insurance. All of this planning and effort puts you well on the road to security maturity. And that's what I have today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah, good information. I hope that was valuable for our folks in attendance. As you are considering any questions that you'd like Kevin to address, please enter those in the question area on the control panel. But I'll feed a couple of questions your way, Kevin. See if you can respond. Appreciate that. So you've provided a lot of information. What's the one thing we need to do to protect from ransomware?
Well, I don't know that there's one thing. It's really, it really depends on kind of where you're at in your journey. Awareness, recognizing the problem, I think, is really the one big thing, is that we can't keep our heads in the sand anymore. And we see a lot of people, we see a lot of people asking questions, and there's about what to do. And so really, it's about assessing your risk and seeing where you're weak and what you've done well, and then seeing what you can do to become more secure. There's always something that, there's always another step you can take. Like we say, you can't be 100% secure, but you can sure add another layer and make it harder. Make it harder so that rather than the hackers pick on you, they'll go find an easier target. Don't be that easy target.
For sure. Next question, Kevin. How can I know the safeguards we have in place are adequate to protect our systems?
Well, most companies want to spend as little as they can for security. But I think there are some investments that are better than others. I talked about MFA and EDR, and certainly the first thing I always like to start with is backup. Have you tested your backup? Are you 100% certain that your backup's going to work in the event of a breach and be available? And then, MFA protects end users and EDR protects endpoints. And so that's where I would invest to begin with.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how do you prioritize the spending for small independent medical practices?
Yeah, for the small independent practices, the first thing is to I think assess the network, is to know what you have and what you don't. I think I talked about that. Also establish a budget. Understand that you're going to have to spend some money. You've probably seen the old Midas commercial. You can pay me now or pay me later. You're going to have to pay somebody, and it's either going to be the hackers and huge headaches from loss of business and all that, or you're going to have to pay for some protections and a vendor to help you walk through that. So, budget is important. You really need to budget for security.
Okay, our next question, Kevin. How important is it really to prepare for a problem that is so complex as ransomware or other malware?
Um, you know, that's that's a little hard to answer. I mean, preparedness. Well, let me put it in this terms. If there's an emergency or a trauma incident, I mean, we're talking to healthcare people here. How prepared are you to deal with that? Somebody comes in with a heart issue or whatever it is. I mean, 911 and all those things are built on being prepared for emergencies. How much time you're business owners as well, and you have to protect against the risk of a ransomware attack. It's a real thing, and so preparedness makes a difference. And the more prepared you are, the better result you're going to get. So you have to decide how much risk tolerance you have, and establish a budget and roll up your sleeves and do the hard work. And it is hard work. I understand that. But as business owners, there's a lot of people relying on us. There's patients, there's employees, and it's a huge responsibility. This is just another part of that responsibility.
Thanks, Kevin. So I am not seeing any additional questions at the moment. So I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar. If you'd like additional detail about anything you've heard from Kevin today, we invite you to contact us at the email address you see on your screen. As a reminder, we'll be following up within a day or two to provide the recording of today's presentation. Each of you will also be receiving our ransomware prevention checklist to help you safeguard your practice from insidious cyber attacks. We invite you to watch your email inbox for invitations to attend future MTS presentations. Please plan to join us again. For now, have a great rest of the day, everyone.